so far from Africa that its many smells are rapidly becoming a distant memory. Our feet consist of 26 bones, 7 of which are the thick, short tarsal bones comprising the heel and the back of the instep. 5 parallel metatarsal bones form the front of the instep that spreads towards the front of the foot to form the ball of the foot. 14 smaller phalanges make up the toes. The large toe is composed of 2, and each smaller toe is made up of 3. The tarsal and the metatarsal bones form the 2 arches of the foot. The plantar arch running from the heel to the ball, and normally touching the ground only at each end, and the metatarsal arch across the ball of the foot. With a thick layer of fatty tissue under the sole, these flexible arches absorb pressure and the shocks of walking and jumping. This I like. Absorb pressure and the shocks of walking. Well, feet, that's something we've experienced. Pressures and shocks. We've walked up a few rough paths, but have stood on some fine, warm beaches. We strolled and limped and crawled along some roads that have had specific places to go, and others that have roamed toward infinity, like the depth of the sky over a desert. Good old feet. I'll apologize now for the crappy shoes you've often had to endure and the uneven terrain you've had to walk. I'll say sorry for the pain caused by thorns, rusty nails, and that damn little worm that began to chew its way from navicular to calcareous. Remember the worm, feet? It entered my foot through a scratch and... a worm up your bum. I'd lie on my bed at night, scratching and scratching at the thin, angry line that showed the worm's path under my 9-year-old skin. I knew it as a sandworm. The worm is microscopic, and it gets under your skin and begins a merry munching journey day and night. Yes, especially at night. The Africans have a theory that it is heading for your brain, so the best time to catch it is when it makes its final dash across your eyeball. I've tried burning the wiggly bastard with the fiery tip of a cigarette and even a candle flame. I attempted toasting it, but that didn't work. So I tried sticking a heated pin in its squiggly path, but all it did was swiggle to the left or right and keep going, heading for my ankle. It has 2 heads, so the German doctor in town mumbled through his nicotine-stained beard. He gave me a salve and ointment to rub on, but this seemed to encourage the wiggly bastard to double its rate of eating. So in the end, you, feet, on the advice of Mabuza, took me across the swollen Matsapa River to visit the Sangoma, the witch doctor. He's as wise as the combined occupants of a zoo and has a skin as gnarled as a sun-dried granadilla. He lived in one of the 3 beehive huts surrounded by a sad maize crop and had the plume of the sabuza bird, as red as a plum, glued to his forehead with what looked like candle wax. He stank. He stank of cow shit and some crappy white man's skin cream that the maidens recently started to apply to whiten their black skins. He had soft hands, and the whites of his eyes were an ancient scroll-like yellow. I sat on the ground in front of him and raised my bare foot off the hot red earth so he could get a look at the wiggly bastard. The Sangoma, not in the least perturbed, looked at my foot and crawled back into his hut, his withered buttocks for all to see. Inside the murkiness of his abode, I could see the shapes of an assortment of dried leaves, herbs, and roots hanging from the rafters. I could smell through the usual aroma of wood smoke the sweetness of marijuana. I glimpsed the pinkness of a child's doll lying on the floor near the arched doorway. It was naked and its limbs had been darkened by fire. Then the Sangoma appeared in the doorway, so I dropped my gaze, feeling guilty for looking into his world. On his knees, he gestures for me to raise my foot. This I do, and he cradles it in his alarmingly soft hands. He then spits on my foot, a huge projectile of phlegm that splatters right on target, right where the worm crawls. I wince as the liquid slides off my flesh like egg yolk and plops onto the dry soil. But I know he's watching me, so I try to keep my contact as he rubs the phlegm into my skin over the worm's track. And while he's doing this, I'm wondering why that baby doll is in the hut and why its limbs are singed. Then the Sangoma pulls out the rusty needle he has between his teeth and aims it towards you, feet. Towards you, you wiggly bastard worm. I tense and my toes curl, awaiting the stab of the needle. Nothing happens. I open my eyes and I sense further movement from the Sangoma in front. He is digging deep into a leather pouch that is around his waist, tied amongst the braided leather strips and beaded thongs. He removes the chipped white shirt button tied to the piece of thread, and in my 9-year-old brain I'm imagining that he's going to sew the button onto my flesh. My stomach lurches, but the Sangoma doesn't sew button to flesh. Instead, he swings the button like a pendulum over the worm's phlegm-covered path. My stomach and feet relax whilst the button swings left and right. I think he's hypnotizing the squiggly bastard. Then the Sangoma sneezes. I can feel the twin moist streams of his hot air on my foot. Suddenly the button stops swinging as if frozen in mid-air by an invisible force. The thread it hangs from has gone as tight as a fishing line with a decent-sized tigerfish on it. Then the wise old man, as quick as a flea can jump, stabs down with the needle right beneath the poised button, right into the worm's trail. I yelp like a puppy, not because of the pain, but because of the abruptness of his action. He drops my foot unceremoniously and puts out his soft hand. I see there's a speck of blood on my foot as I hand the Sangoma the coins. He stands and shuffles off between his huts, scattering the wretched half-plucked chickens as he goes, and I understand this as being my cue to leave. So we do, feet, heading for the river's bank where the muddy water slides between the stepping stones that brought us here in the first place. I notice that the fluffy seed pods of the reeds by the water are bursting like snowflakes into the breeze, and that the green and yellow Cape Weaver birds are in full harmony as the males make their upside-down nests, a harmony that may falter to a frustrated twitter when their wives examine the nests and begin to tear them apart if dissatisfied with the construction or location. That night and every night since, there has been no worm, no itching, no wiggly movement. For a few nights, I was still wondering about that singed child's doll back in the Sangoma's hut. I had pink flesh. I had singed my own flesh to be rid of the wiggly bastard. Now you can understand, feet, why most Africans never sit with their bums on the soil, why most squat on their heels in what may be construed as a rocking motion. It's so you don't get a wiggly bastard up your bum, feet. Mabuza once told me that picking up a pebble at the base of a cliff meant nothing. Picking up a pebble on top of a cliff, however, meant everything. Interesting to know where your feet have taken you, dying father, in comparison to where mine have taken me. Interesting that I will never walk in your footsteps, or that our paths will never intertwine. Our separate roads will never meet because I will never know why or which road you chose to follow. I will never know what magic bus it was that you took to wherever it is you wanted to be. I do not know the timbre of your voice. I do not know your smell. I've never felt the pain of your hand across my backside where I did wrong, nor your embrace when I did right, or the sound of your laugh when I did funny. You are a tall, broad-shouldered, murky shape that sat on the side of a swimming pool with its testicles hanging out of the corner of a loose swimming costume, and that smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes and wore dark sunglasses.